We're taking a look back at the biggest political turning points, trends, and controversies as we hit rewind on Rising. We've got the power players, scandals, and outrageous decisions that have defined our conversations. Piers Morgan called out left-leaning journalist Taylor Lorenz for heartless remarks she made about the slain UnitedHealthcare CEO, Brian Thompson. Let's watch.
I do believe in the sanctity of life, and I think that's why I felt, along with so many other Americans, joy, unfortunately, because it feels like...
Serious?
I mean...
Joy in a man's execution?
Maybe not joy, but certainly not empathy. Because again,
we're watching the footage. How can this make you joyful? This guy's a husband, he's a father, and he's being gunned down in the middle of Manhattan. Why does that make you joyful?
Thousands of Americans that be murdered. So are the tens of thousands of Americans, innocent Americans, who died because greedy health insurance executives like this one push policies of denying care to the most vulnerable people. And the many millions of Americans that have watched people that I care about suffer and in some cases die because of lack of health care.
So should they all be killed then? Should they all be killed, these healthcare executives? Would that make you even more joyful?
No, that would not.
Thompson was shot and killed in Midtown Manhattan on December 4th in a targeted attack. Police arrested 26-year-old Luigi Mangione Monday in a McDonald's in Pennsylvania following a 5-day manhunt. Police also recovered a manifesto laying out his views.
Yes, and we discussed that earlier in the show. My radar, check that out if you missed it. Some more details, some insights into this figure, Luigi Mangione, who seems to have had some kind of psychotic break, perhaps following a back injury or surgery, but is also someone with political views and a long presence on social media that I'm sure will be scrutinized significantly over the next several days. Taylor Lorenz is someone known to both of us. Yes. I have been friendly with her certainly in the past. She's a very controversial figure. I have disagreed with her on numerous occasions on social media in terms of reporting she's done. And certainly in this case, she is kind of the quintessential example of someone I would accuse of giving a voice to this, I mean, to use her own word, joy that this man got killed. I mean, she wasn't accused of being joyful. She said she felt joy. And then when Piers Morgan challenged her, she walked it back to, well, I don't feel empathy for it. I think, honestly, if someone got killed and I secretly felt joyful about it, I would just shut the F up. I would just not say anything. I would know that that is a shameful way to feel about someone dying. And you should just not, if you have something really that unpleasant to say, you should probably just not express it. And it is fine to criticize the healthcare industry and whatever this person's role in it was, although there was joy being felt before there was any time to process, well, what is this person's exact involvement and what is exactly their company doing? The joy was automatic, and I think not an encouraging tendency for people engaging in it.
So let me try to walk a sort of somewhat fine line as honestly as I can. Firstly, Taylor Lorenz worked at the Hill at one point, and I knew her at that time, and in my personal dealings with her, she was always perfectly fine and pleasant person. I disagree with many of the things she writes on social media. I'm sure she might well disagree with lots of views I hold, and that is all fine. She is somebody who has a greater appetite for social media conflict than I do, and that is also, that's okay. I mean, people can approach social media in different ways. Obviously, I don't agree with using the term joy about the killing of someone, and I think one of the things that we have to be careful of, whatever it is we're discussing, this happens because I, as you know, discuss Israel and Palestine quite a lot, we have to be careful of feeling so strongly about an issue that we lose our humanity for the people on the other side.
I agree so strongly with that, yes.
And that is a real problem. Now, I think that joy is an inappropriate word to use about the killing of anyone. The degree to which I would not defend the joy point, but defend the point that Taylor is making more broadly is the vast number of people in this country who have been victimized by health insurance companies. And I think that as we were talking about in an earlier segment, there is real anger and real hurt about that. Do I think that means you go up to somebody in Manhattan Street and shoot them? No. Does that mean that when that happens, I celebrate the shooting of that person? No. But I think that the point that she makes about people who have been grievously hurt and in some cases have died as a consequence of callousness on the part of insurance companies is a legitimate point to make.
I mean, look, I think it is legitimate, and I advocate changes to the healthcare insurance system, mostly in terms of, and I'm open to ideas for what will improve it, more accountability, more transparency around prices would be my number one thing. So you know what you're actually getting. I would like a system where, I mean, we kind of have this system, but to make it more transparent that you sign up for this level of coverage and here's what you get, or you're going to sign up for this level of coverage and this is what you get, and it's very clear to people. Because I do think there's a little bit of a difference here, and I'm not going to disagree with you necessarily on the callousness of insurance companies or faceless bureaucrats making decisions that end up being life and decisions for some people. But it's a little bit different. They're saying, well, we're not going to pay. Like, they're not literally killing you. And they're also not saying we're prohibiting people from providing you medical care. We're saying we are not going to pay for it. That's a little different. I mean, this is starting to get into philosophical terms. That, like, I don't think, I would not say there is a duty to help someone. Maybe it's cold and callous, but you're not, if somebody is in some mortal peril and you don't leap to their defense, I would not say you've killed them. I would not say there's some obligation for you to do so. Maybe you can say it's cold and callous to do that. Particularly in an arrangement, what the insurance company would say, well, this is the policy that you signed up for. You know what we cover, and you don't qualify. You should pay for or arrange for different coverage if that's what you want. Now, I know it's just to round that, I know that's much more complicated, and I've been in positions not with health insurance particular, but with car insurance, where I'm like, where they say, yeah, we're not going to cover this. I'm like, it's clearly you're supposed to. I really thought based on what it is, and then you get into some argument with them. So I'm really not coming to their defense, or don't accuse me of simping for healthcare insurance CEOs, but do you see what I mean on the philosophical, how it's a little bit different, say they're killing you?
I do see that it is different on the philosophical level, but I think that one of the problems is that fundamental equation that would apply to fair business transactions. You know what we cover, we don't cover that, so you're out of luck, isn't really people's experience of either the health insurance industry or most insurance industries. And those industries and those corporations employ a lot of people whose de facto purpose is to deny claims. And there has been further controversy about the use of AI to find ways to deny claims and all of that. So I think the problem is, and one of the reasons that people are so angry with insurance companies, is direct experience of insurance companies trying to wriggle out of covering things that the policy appears to insure.
Sure. No, I get that. Good on Piers Morgan for having all these very interesting discussions on his show. He's doing, maybe he's taking a page out of our book. We try to have interesting discussions here, but there's people all over the place. There's Tommy Lauren, and then, and I know, I can't think of his name, the other gentleman, but he's Mark Lamont Hill, that's right. He's a very interesting, provocative figure on the kind of progressive left, so good on Piers
trying to broaden the horizons.
Fostering those kinds of discussions.
For sure.
More Rising coming up next. Please stay with us. Good morning and welcome to Rising. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got another excellent show for you today. Matt Taibbi, one of our favorite guests, is joining us to discuss the potential preemptive pardoning of various folks that is being contemplated by some in the Biden administration. And we'll be talking about lots of other very interesting subjects with Niall Stanage. Nice to see you.
A whole gamut of topics to talk about, Robbie. Always a pleasure. Let's get started. Robbie, what is on your radar?
Well, Luigi Mangione, the 26-year-old suspected killer of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson, wrote a brief manifesto explaining his actions, and we now know what it says. That's because independent left journalist Ken Klippenstein obtained and published it on Substack. Now, Klippenstein is a frequent guest on our program. He notes that he is far from the only reporter to obtain the manifesto. Quote, major media outlets are also in possession of the document, but have refused to publish it and not even articulated a reason why, writes Klippenstein. My queries to the New York Times, CNN, and ABC to explain their rationale for withholding the manifesto while gladly quoting from it selectively have not been answered. Like Ken, I'd be very interested to hear the mainstream media's reasoning for withholding the manifesto. Now, it may be because they're worried about giving the alleged killer more publicity, which they fear, some have argued this, has a social contagion effect, inspiring copycat killers. That might not be completely unreasonable, and indeed I would also caution that we might not have very much to learn from a close reading of Mangione's political views, however well articulated they might be. Friends and family report that he suffered a disturbing psychological breakdown due perhaps to a back injury and the efforts to treat it, that he acted erratically and seemingly vanished from the face of the earth. He was reported missing by his mother. Now, pain can take a terrible toll on a person's mental health, and a person who is in the grips of a pain-related mental collapse is probably not a person whose ideology needs to be carefully studied. All that said, the idea that the media can simply keep silent about the manifesto and thus discourage interest in Luigi Mangione is obviously ridiculous. If you log onto social media, you'll see photos of him everywhere. He's very photogenic, that's part of it. You'll read people's thoughts about him. You'll see videos of him. In the internet age, it's simply impossible to stop people from talking about the things they want to talk about. The mainstream media wishes it still had the power to control and shut down the conversation, keep us away from subjects they don't want to discuss. But the reality is that's all over now. It ain't going to happen. Which means that people are free to speculate wildly about why Mangione allegedly gunned down the CEO of a major healthcare company. They are also free to speculate that there's something more to this story, and many are doing just that. The writer Walter Kern, for instance, posted that aspects of this story seem fake to him, and he's hardly the only one expressing that view. Social media is full of takes from people saying that Mangione is the fall guy or that he's been set up, that sort of thing. The mainstream media refusing to show you his manifesto isn't going to make those doubters go away. On the contrary, it's going to make people suspicious that the truth or something like it is being kept hidden from them. Well, not here on Rising. We're going to read the manifesto in full. It is mercifully short and concise. Here is what he wrote. To the feds, I'll keep this short because I do respect what you do for our country. To save you a lengthy investigation, I state plainly that I wasn't working with anyone. This was fairly trivial, some elementary social engineering, basic CAD, a lot of patience. The spiral notebook, if present, has some straggling notes and to-do lists that illuminate the gist of it. My tech is pretty locked down because I work in engineering, so probably not much info there. I do apologize for any strife or traumas, but it had to be done. Frankly, these parasites simply had it coming. A reminder, the U.S. has the #1 most expensive healthcare system in the world, yet we rank roughly number 42 in life expectancy. United is the largest company in the U.S. by market cap, behind only Apple, Google, and Walmart. It has grown and grown, but has our life expectancy? No. The reality is these have simply gotten too powerful, and they continue to abuse our country for immense profit because of the American public has allowed them to get away with it. Obviously, the problem is more complex, but I do not have the space, and frankly, I do not pretend to be the most qualified person to lay out the full argument. But many have illuminated the corruption and greed, e.g. Rosenthal and more, decades ago, and the problems simply remain. It is not an issue of awareness at this point, but clearly power games at play. Evidently, I am the first to face it with such brutal honesty." End quote. Now, while being escorted by police to his extradition hearing in Pennsylvania on Tuesday, Mangione said the following.
"I'm completely out of touch, and the intelligence of the American people, it's lived experience."
So, that is his stated explanation for his actions. As I said, it is a brief manifesto by the standards of deranged killers. And I do find it, like Ken, I don't really understand. Well, I should rephrase that. I understand generally what the rationale is for keeping these manifestos hidden. Media members figure that if we shower attention on people who commit these kinds of acts, we'll get more of them. There is some social psychology research to suggest that might be the case. The problem is, look at all this attention this guy's getting. Yeah. He's going to get attention. It just can't be stopped. And what I am seeing is a lot of rejection of official narratives about him even being responsible or involved, which I understand because official narratives are wrong sometimes. And this is a very weird situation. But my bottom line is I don't think the media is doing anyone any favors by holding this kind of stuff back. You can't stop people from talking about it. All you can do is create paranoia about what's going on.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I understand the theoretical reasons why manifestos are sometimes not published, but I don't think it really makes any sense in this particular case. Just to pick up on one phrase that you used there, speaking about it, you said, by it's succinct or short, by the standards of deranged killers. Now, setting aside the fact that this guy we think is going to plead not guilty, I'm not at all persuaded that he is in fact deranged. I mean, I think one of the issues with the manifesto is a lot of people would agree with what he says in that manifesto, which does not mean that they think he was right to allegedly go and shoot Brian Thompson in the back and ultimately kill him. I think that the interesting thing about the manifesto is how mainstream or widely held a lot of the views are. Whether Mr. Mangione ultimately is guilty or not, he's clearly an intelligent man. He has thought a lot about these things, and just even things like in the manifesto, the reminder that the US has the #1 most expensive healthcare system in the world, yet we rank roughly 42nd in life expectancy. That's a completely mainstream critique of the US healthcare industry, of the health insurance industry, even referring to them as parasites. I think, frankly, a lot of people view the insurance industry as parasitical. Again, I don't want to get into the thing of expressing joy about anybody's killing or anything like that, but I think the beliefs outlined in the manifesto are held by a large number of people.
Certainly they are, and you're right, we can't just casually assert that people are necessarily crazy with that, that's going to be, if he pled crazy, then
right.
we bring out experts to evaluate him, that kind of thing. I mean, there's something about dropping off the face of the earth, suddenly not respond. Friends worried about him because he stopped responding to them, that he didn't show up for events he was supposed to go to. His mom reported him missing. There's some of this behavior that I associate with being unhinged or psychologically unwell. Maybe deranged is the wrong word. Right, there's no evidence he's like seeing ghosts or something or communicating with people who aren't there. And pain, as I said in the radar, does make you do crazy things without being necessarily crazy. I mean, this happens to older people in our lives, who are the people who are most likely to suffer from chronic pain. They're having good days and bad days where they're fully lucid, and bad days where they are crazy. This has happened to elder people I've known in my life who are totally nuts on days where they're just having a bad day.
Sure.
I wonder if that is going to be at the root of that, and that obviously could tie into the healthcare aspect.
No, it could. And when I was making taking issue with the word deranged, I mean, I don't know whether he has psychological issues or not, whether he suffered some kind of break following this back injury or not. My point is really that based upon the manifesto, those are not the views of a deranged person. To put it in even starker terms, I think what a lot of people have a problem with, if he is guilty, is that he shot the guy. It's not what he believes that led him to those actions. It's the action that most people have an objection to. Some do not, as we discussed here yesterday. People who take what I think we both consider inappropriate glee in someone's death.
Joyful,
etc. I mean, I'm not defending that at all, but I think the rationale that is offered in this manifesto is one that isn't even a left-wing viewpoint necessarily. It is a critical of the insurance industry and the healthcare system viewpoint, which is pretty widely shared.
Have you ever read a manifesto where the alleged killer says, admittedly, I don't know everything about this, I'm not an expert, people might know more. We have a humble alleged killer.
I know, highly unusual.
Striking.
It doesn't normally, I think killing normally leads or emanates from a more absolutist mindset. And, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, who knows.
Fascinating. Well, we will be discussing more details of this case a little bit later on the show. We'll be talking about what Joe Rogan had to say about it, and lots more to come still on Rising. Stay tuned.
There's been a lot of speculation around Luigi Mangione and his alleged actions, and rightfully so. Mangione has been indicted on charges of murdering UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. Luigi came from a wealthy background, was the valedictorian at his high school, and attended an Ivy League university. So what went wrong? Were there any signs pointing in the direction of committing the acts that he's been accused of?
Popular Substacker and internet personality Gurwinder Bogle has actually met Mangione. In a piece titled "I Met the Alleged CEO Assassin," Bogle reveals that Mangione subscribed to Bogle's The Prism Substack. Mangione bought a founding membership to that Substack, which cost $200, and as part of that deal, it allowed him to have video calls with Mr. Bogle. Bogle opens his piece by writing, quote, "After the suspected killer of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson was revealed to be Luigi Mangione, a bright young man from a well-to-do family, thousands of pundits rushed to tell us why he did it. I, however, held back because, unlike them, I'd actually met Luigi, and I knew all was not what it seemed." Joining us now to discuss his interactions with Luigi Mangione is Gurwinder Bogle. Welcome, Gurwinder.
Thank you.
So I was fascinated reading your piece, as I'm sure many people were. We explained in the introduction how you guys connected in the first place. And in that video call that we referenced, you found Luigi Mangione a pretty nice guy, in plain terms.
Yeah, I mean, he had many good qualities. He was polite, he was humble, open-minded, generous, just the complete opposite of what you would expect an alleged killer would be.
And what kind of shape did your conversations take? Like, what did you chat with him about?
So it was a 2-hour conversation, so we covered so many different subjects. But I think the general theme of the conversation was probably agency. One of the things that Luigi was very concerned with was the effect that tech companies were having on people's agency. Basically believed that it was taking away people's autonomy by addicting them to apps and, making people sort of tribal on social media and, just sort of affecting human behavior online. And he was quite concerned about this. He believed it was particularly bad in Japan because when I had a conversation with him, he was in Japan. And he believed that basically Japan had become a kind of place where people are not leaving their homes because they're addicted to the internet. They're addicted to their phones, they're addicted to their laptops. And he felt that this was also happening in the West as well. And so he found this was a problem for himself. He actually confessed to me that he spent many mornings and afternoons just sort of on his computer, just sort of doom scrolling on social media. And so we tried to find ways for him to be less addicted to social media. Yeah.
You also talk about a conversation you all had about inherited or generational trauma and a disagreement you had on that issue. Luigi was apparently of the belief that trauma could be inherited from parents genetically. You pushed back on that claim, and you point out that that kind of mindset can lead someone to sort of passively accept their fate as opposed to working against it. Do you think that could have potentially played a role in perhaps his feeling that he was sort of powerless to change forces around him?
I don't know. I mean, he was generally optimistic. He didn't seem like he was much of a doomer. He seemed like he was actually he did have a somewhat pessimistic worldview, but he also was very interested in action. He wanted to change things. So he wasn't somebody who just was resigned, to his fate or anything like that. He actually, one of the things that he kept saying to me was that I needed to be more positive, actually, because one of the themes of my writing is that I talk a lot about the problems of the modern age, the digital age. And he said that he wanted me to focus more on action, on how we can actually change things rather than just reiterating the problems. So he was interested in solutions. The thing with the genetics, I think, may have been a misunderstanding because, I mean, I can't even remember how we started talking about intergenerational trauma, but he just said to me that he believed it was sort of inherited like generational wealth. And so I just thought maybe he was talking about this thing called epigenetic trauma, which I regard as pseudoscience. And so we had a bit of a disagreement there. And then I sent him an article afterwards because I just didn't want him to believe that, if he had any trauma, that it was sort of in his genes. So I sent him an article debunking it. And he seemed to be very open to that point of view. He replied to me soon after saying that he had learned something from the essay and he no longer regarded it as sort of being like generational wealth.
And Gurwinder, sorry, do you want to finish that thought?
Sorry, carry on.
So you mentioned in the piece that you have a few interactions on social media with him, and then I think you yourself took a step back, unrelated to anything pertaining to him, of course, from social media, and it appears that he himself may have become a little more isolated and withdrawn more broadly from societal interaction. To be clear, you write that you were sickened by the murder of which he is accused, but then you go on to say that the manifesto, so-called manifesto that has been attributed to him, was one that you found you disagreed with it, but you also found it a little disappointing. You felt that it wasn't as intellectually strong as the person whom you had interacted with. Just tell us a little more about that.
So the impression I got of Luigi when I spoke to him was that he was a very assiduous person. He was somebody who was very careful. He did his research. He didn't tend to have strong opinions until he had actually researched something well. That was my impression of him. Obviously, he got the thing about intergenerational trauma. Maybe he got that wrong. I mean, I might have misunderstood what he meant by it, but generally he was well read and he was careful in his opinions. The manifesto is just sort of, it seems like it was written by a high schooler. Some of the sort of claims in it seem to have been lifted from an outdated page in Wikipedia. And it also cites Michael Moore as a source. And Michael Moore is a propagandist. A lot of his documentaries are, just contain cherry-picked information and in order to further a narrative. It's really low quality information. And I would not have thought that the Luigi that I know of, at least, would have been sort of convinced by something like a Michael Moore documentary, or or a Wikipedia page. It just doesn't seem like he was a smart guy. He is a smart guy, Luigi Mangione. He's an engineer. I think he's got a degree in computer science. He's very well read. He spoke of a lot of different authors from very wide and diverse places and times. So he clearly has read a lot. So the impression that I got of Luigi sort of made it hard for me to believe that he had written that manifesto. And I'm not saying he didn't, I don't know, but it just seems like if he did write it, then maybe there was something going on in his brain. Maybe he was in extreme pain. Maybe he was mentally ill. I don't know. But it's low quality, and it's just the words themselves are low quality, but also it's only 262 words. And I thought that if he was going to do something like this, he would have spent a lot more time writing something substantial. I mean, somebody that he was a fan of is Ted Kaczynski, and he didn't approve of Ted Kaczynski's violence. He made it very clear that he didn't approve of his actions. He only thought that his ideas were interesting. But Ted Kaczynski wrote a 35,000 word manifesto when he did his actions, so he took his time and he really wanted to sort of, get his message out there. And I thought, somebody like Luigi, if he was really interested in changing the debate, he would have written something more than 262 words that he cited Michael Moore and Wikipedia. He would have spent a lot more time really formulating an effective argument. At least that's the Luigi that I thought, from my interactions with him. That's the kind of person I thought he would be, but I don't know.
Did you all ever talk about the healthcare industry in America? And then you also mentioned in the piece that you believe his last online communication was a time that he actually reached out to you. Can you tell us about that as well?
Yeah, so regarding the healthcare, we only had one brief exchange where I just remember him saying that the US healthcare system was expensive, and he said that I was lucky to be in Britain because we've got a national health service. And I remember replying to him that the NHS isn't actually all that great because we have long waiting lists. Because when healthcare is free at the point of use, then everybody wants to use it, which means there's less healthcare for everybody. So it was a very brief exchange, and then we moved on from that. So that was the only thing that we spoke about, which was relevant to healthcare. And regarding the final message that I received from him, so that was on June the 10th, and that was a DM via Twitter in which he asked me to help him with his social media feed. He wanted me to help him sort of curate his feed and maybe to write a guide for him. And I said that I would get back to him, but at that time I was writing something on commission, so I was kind of deep in that. But I told him I'd get back to him, and then I just kind of forgot all about it. And so I left social media sort of just shortly after, and to focus on my book. And that was it. That was the last I heard from him, because I spoke to a New York Times journalist, and they said that was the last online communication that they had a record of. I don't know if they found anything later since, but that sort of made me worry that maybe his request was a kind of awkward cry for help. So it's hard to know. He was quite a hard to read person, so it was hard to know what he meant by that, but it was the last message that I heard from him. So,
and just finally, Gurinder, just how shocked were you when? I can't really imagine somebody that I was in even perfunctory contact with suddenly being this sort of in the world headlines for an alleged murder. So, whenever you first read his name or you saw that he had been apprehended, what was your immediate reaction?
Complete bewilderment. I remember seeing a news report and I saw the name Luigi Mangione, and I thought, I know that name. And then I just looked through my emails and I saw the same name, and I thought, it can't be the same person. But then I saw that the profile picture that they were showing on the news report was the same one as the emails. And then it just kind of, then it really hit me. And I'm still having trouble believing it, This is why there's a part of me that kind of believes that maybe he's innocent. I know that the evidence against him is quite strong. I've heard that there's DNA evidence against him and surveillance evidence, and apparently they found a bag with stuff in it. But it would be much easier on my mind if he was just framed, or if he was, just the wrong guy. But like I say in my piece, sometimes the nicest people turn out to be capable of the greatest cruelty, because the same sort of the same thing that makes them cruel can make them kind. It's this kind of emotional impulsivity, which can, make people who are very kind very cruel. So that could help explain it. The main thing is that's sort of bugging me is the intelligence gap between the Luigi that I spoke to and the Luigi who allegedly wrote the manifesto and committed the murder of Brian Thompson.
Wow, really fascinating, Gurwinder Bogle. Thank you so much for joining us this morning on Rising.
Thank you.
Well, independent journalist Taylor Lorenz is catching heat for what she said about Luigi Mangione, the alleged murderer of the UnitedHealthcare CEO, back in December.
Lorenz joined CNN's Donnie O'Sullivan for an interview about extremism in America. Here she is.
Hilarious to see these millionaire media pundits on TV clutching their pearls about someone standing a murderer when this is the United States of America, as if we don't lionize criminals, as if we don't have, we don't stand murderers of all sorts, and we give them Netflix shows.
Lorenz mentioned that there was a disconnect between the way Americans feel and how the mainstream media depicts the Mangione case.
She also said she experienced significant audience growth during her coverage of the case.
Here's Lorenz on the fanfare surrounding Mangione.
So you're going to see women especially that feel like, oh my God, right? Like here's this man who's revolutionary, who's famous, who's handsome, who's young, who's smart. He's a person that seems this morally good man, which is hard to find.
Reactions to Taylor's comments on CNN abounded on X. Writer at Outkick and author Ian Miller wrote, CNN is happy to call any opinions they don't like harmful and dangerous, and now they're doing an interview with Taylor Lorenz, who openly fawns over Luigi Mangione and calls him moral. Amazing what protection having the right political ideology buys.
Lorenz responded to the situation on Blue Sky, writing, "Me, the women who show up outside Luigi's jail believe him to be this moral hero, and they may be in for a rude awakening when he actually starts speaking. We don't actually know his belief system or morals at all. The entire media, Taylor Lorenz says Luigi is morally good." Well, we've quite a lot to discuss here, Robbie. I think we should perhaps, well, I should certainly declare an interest of a kind in that I know Taylor Lorenz personally, although I haven't spoken with her for some years. She used to work here at the Hill, which is how I know her. She was always perfectly pleasant to me, and so that's something to be stated. I also know very slightly Donny O'Sullivan, because Irish journalists tend to know each other. I think I've met him once or twice. He has also been perfectly pleasant. She is now in the middle of a media storm for obvious reasons.
And not for the first time. I similarly know her socially. We have been friendly in the past, though I completely disagree with virtually everything she has to say on almost every subject these days. Although she did kind of say something here, she was verging on a point that's true. I think she feels captured by her audience, that she experienced massive growth. And it's true that there is a strand out there, even if some people who watch the show, of a sympathy of a kind, or maybe not a sympathy, but just a really an understandable hatred of what the healthcare system has done to people in this country, and maybe even a lust for vengeance against it that I don't think is a good tendency, is a tendency one should, does not nurture the soul, that she tapped into by going all in on this in a just utterly bonkers way. But the hypocrisy that is just so clear that some people have seized on is she has previously suggested or taken the position that criticism, heated criticism, sometimes directed at her, is like this really beyond the pale sort of crime or thing that needs to be pursued and countered and fought. She's actually got, whenever she was interviewed, I can't remember on what network, I think it might have been MSNBC, but I don't remember which one, it was a mainstream network, where she talked about the harassment she's faced, and she teared up about it, and then she got made fun of in the response to that interview, and she attacked the people who interviewed her for allowing her to be portrayed that. Well, what else they were supposed to do? They're interviewing you and you cried on camera. So she's treated all of that like an attack on her personally. But then a literal instance of actual cold-blooded murder gets like, oh, well, he's tapping into something. I think that is what some people, a lot of people, myself frankly included, find it so appalling about that juxtaposition. That like heated criticism is some kind of crime, but an actual crime is, well, he's mad.
Yeah, I mean...
You know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying. I mean, I think that Taylor has, over the years, inserted herself into numerous online controversies, and then often complains that the criticism of her, as you say, is unfair or abusive, having at the very least stoked that controversy. She plainly doesn't see it that way. I mean, I prefer her live and in person to her online persona, which I find more sort of fractious and whatever, just controversy seeking, but
The thing she did that first really enraged the tech world, a lot of libertarian right people. Well, remember Clubhouse was a thing during the pandemic. There's a conversation featuring Mark Andreessen and some other people. Mark Andreessen is a big tech investor person, actually now a big backer of Donald Trump, although he had come to that more, I don't know how recently, but had not always been a Trump person. And she accused him of saying the R word, the R slur. It was actually not even him who said it, so she got that incorrect.
Okay.
But also she came out with a big thing about how like this was some horrible. I mean, you can certainly take the position that people shouldn't use that word. It's kind of coming back into our lingo as just a way to refer to some people as.
I think it's an unpleasant word.
I don't think it's a federal hate crime to do it, and to treat that way. And again, he didn't even say it, to be clear. It was somebody else. And then, to be like, but accused murderer. I also wanted to, I'm not sure we played this exact quote, or maybe we did. She described Luigi Mangione, and also, by the way, I find the worship of him no different from the worship of Charles Manson or what. It has always been the case.
He's not convicted yet,
that women
entitled to the presumption of innocence.
Sure, alleged killer, whatever, that's fine. It has always been the case that some psychotic women out there fall in love with these kinds of people, and I don't get it, but there's nothing new about that. It's the same kind of thing Charles Manson had going on. She said, here's this man who's a revolutionary, who's famous, who's handsome, who's young, who's smart. He's a person that seems like a morally good man, which is hard to find. I don't know if this was an intentional reference. I suspect it wasn't. But this was not pointed out to me. It was pointed out by colleagues of mine at Reason. there is and it's one of my favorite short stories. It's a short story called "A Good Man is Hard to Find."
Okay.
It's by Flannery O'Connor. It's a brilliant writer about Southern Gothic, the kind of immediately before, immediately after World War II period in the South. This story is about an escaped criminal who off-screen murders this family who like turns down a wrong driveway. And actually, in Flannery O'Connor's later telling, she's Catholic, and this was all about Catholic versus Protestant in a way that if you were just reading the story, you could never get. Even I, as someone who was raised Catholic and went to Catholic school, I do not see what she sees in her own story about how it's Catholic versus Protestant. What it seems like is about this just really bad dude and how these oblivious people all get killed by him for almost like the grandmother character presumes there's some goodness to him and then he shoots her dead and says, in the end he says his famous line, she would have been a good woman if there'd been someone to shoot her in the face every day of her life. So I don't know if this was an intentional reference to this, but it was certainly not missed by colleagues of mine who are also a fan of Flannery O'Connor's work.
Well, I appreciate that guide to Flannery O'Connor, Robbie, which I'm sure will be well received by our audience. But look, the thing that I find about Taylor is sometimes she goes overboard in what would otherwise be a very interesting discussion. So in relation to Luigi Mangione, you did have in some polls, like there was an Emerson College poll, 41% of voters under 30 found the killing of Thompson acceptable. There were other polls that showed similar levels of sympathy. I think there is a valid discussion to be had about why people are so enraged about the health insurance industry, the degree to which the avarice of that industry plays into it, the degree to which, UnitedHealthcare made $14 billion profit last year. So those things are genuine issues to be discussed. That is not to justify the killing of Mr. Thompson. And then, now, in a limited defense of Taylor, well, the clip that we played, and I can't remember where we started it off, but at the start, she's clearly saying some women see him this way. And then at the end, where she goes into the question about him being a moral person, it's much less clear whether that is her personal opinion or whether she's still saying some women see him that way. In any event, it reminded me of the debate she had with Piers Morgan on this same subject, where she said she felt joy about his killing, and she quite rightly and appropriately got a lot of pushback from that, and she stepped back slightly and said, well, maybe not joy, but not empathy.
Step back very slightly, yeah.
Very slightly,
right?
Yeah.
She has had plenty of opportunities to emphasize that she's commenting on or observing a phenomenon that is real, not saying that she's a participant in this phenomenon. She's had plenty of opportunities to clarify that, and has not, I don't think, really done it to my satisfaction or anyone's satisfaction.
I think that's a fair point. I'm hindered by having a degree of personal interaction with her years ago, and I quite liked her. So I'm reluctant to put the boot in, but I also find some of the stuff difficult to defend.
Well, she's welcome to come on Rising and discuss for herself, and we can all hang out after, because we're friendly otherwise. But I think our viewers know that the social dynamic and the friendship is not impacted by having completely discordant political or philosophical views. You tell us what you think. Let me know if you're also a fan of Flannery O'Connor in the comments, please.
Absolutely.
Great author. Next up on Rising, why Stephen A. Smith says he may have no choice but to run for president. Stay with us.
Luigi Mangione, the man accused of gunning down UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson, is facing new charges in federal court that make him eligible to receive the death penalty.
Mangione was indicted Thursday on charges of murder, stalking, and a firearms offence. The indictment formalises charges that federal prosecutors unsealed late last year. The murder charge brings with it the possibility of the death sentence.
Attorney General Pam Bondi made it clear earlier this month that DOJ lawyers will be seeking the death sentence if Mangione is convicted. Mangione's lawyers have asked a federal judge to block the DOJ from seeking the death penalty, arguing prosecutors' pursuit of the sentence is a political stunt and has tainted the jury pool.
The 26-year-old suspected assassin has also been charged with murder and terrorism in a New York state court, and he has pleaded not guilty to those charges. He additionally faces state charges in Pennsylvania, where he was arrested after a week-long manhunt. Well, more in the Mangione case. He's entitled to his day in court like anyone else is, or his multiple days in court, given the federal charges and the state charges. Presumption of innocence and all that. Having said all of that, I'm not in favour of going up behind people in the street and shooting them dead. I think that's, a bad thing to do, whatever strong political opinions you may have. I've long thought the most interesting thing about the Mangione case was the polling in the wake of it that showed a quite significant number, particularly of younger people, somewhat sympathetic to what he did. I can completely, to be clear, understand why his purported viewpoints are popular. I think the health insurance industry is very unpopular, and my view is that that is often for valid reasons. But extrapolating from that to the sort of Free Luigi cheerleading, and I can't really go down that road.
Yeah, it's incredibly disturbing to me as well. And on the death sentence seeking by the DOJ, I was watching our friends at News Nation this morning, and
yes.
Their legal analyst was saying, look, it's really far too early to even say whether this will be on the table. It's far too early for the court to rule that this could even be in play, and far too early for even the defense attorneys to try to get that penalty off the table. Basically, they'd have to go through the process of actually trying the case first before they got to the sentencing. So I think that remains to be seen whether or not that will really be on the table, regardless of what Pam Bondi says. But Taylor Lorenz, who has gotten a lot of attention for her
here we go again.
Okay,
go ahead.
It's new. She was on Hannity last night, which I thought was fascinating, right?
Okay.
And he tried repeatedly to get her to condemn the assassination, saying, look, even if you think that Brian Thompson was a horrible guy, you think that the healthcare insurance industry is a total racket, can you not just condemn the assassination? And she refused to do it repeatedly. And unfortunately, she's talked about how much her audience has grown since she's taken those positions. There's obviously a lot of young people who agree with that sentiment, and I find that very troubling.
Yep. Whenever Taylor comes up, I always disclose that she used to work here at the Hill.
Oh, did she?
She did,
I did not know that.
Quite a few years ago now. I knew her a little bit. We got along fine. I still, I disagree with many of the things she says. I think some of the things she says seem designed to stoke controversy. I mean, there was a previous interview in the immediate wake of the killing of Brian Thompson with Piers Morgan, where she said that she felt joy at Brian Thompson's killing, and then she got some pushback and she walked it back slightly, saying maybe not joy, but empathy with the person who killed him. I can't, defend that. I don't think that those are sentiments that are useful or constructive to express. The fact that people, like by her own admission, it added to her audience to hold to those kind of views, that I think is worrying, as you rightly said, but also indicative of a broader sort of media and cultural picture right now, where it is often the most inflammatory statements and the most inflammatory people that acquire the biggest followings. I don't think that's at all healthy for the United States as a culture, but I don't know what you can do about it either.
Yeah, I don't know either. And I know a lot of our viewers feel that way as well, and we get a lot of heat when we talk about this subject. Right. But I think, if you want to throw in an analogy that maybe makes people think twice about this type of vigilante justice, let's say you're someone who is progressive, and there's someone running around killing accused members of MS-13 who are in the country illegally, and they say, well, they're part of this gang whose motto is rape, control, kill. Would you find that justified? I mean, those people are assumed to be bad people in public opinion, but I think we would all agree that they would have to be in immigration court to adjudicate those claims. Or if you're a Republican and you see that people have accused Trump of defying court orders, would it then be justified to assassinate Trump? So I think those are two sort of comparisons where people on both sides of the aisle who would feel sympathy, I guess, to the idea that the health insurance companies are killing people, it would hopefully give you pause as to the type of actions that Luigi Mangione carried out.
Right, and the hope is that also one can keep the political argument or viewpoint disentangled from the violence that is committed by people who hold to that viewpoint, right? So in relation to, for example, the Brian Thompson killing, we can still obviously have the debate very vigorously about the health insurance industry and what some people, including me, see as its avarice, at the same time as condemning clearly and unequivocally the killing of Brian Thompson. Similarly, some of the Trump examples that you cited. This is also a topic that is to a degree personal to me, in that I grew up in the north of Ireland at the time when there was an armed conflict. And you know, that was an experience that just, obviously is formative for me, but it also gives me, I think, some sense how inflammatory language can, in fact, lead to violence. And once that Pandora's box is open, it's very, very difficult to get it closed again, and that's a real danger.
Yeah, I'm probably more with Robbie on the inflammatory language leading to violence, but I will say that I don't like the trend of referring to political opponents as evil or saying that they are literally killing people with their actions. To me, that's where it goes too far, and culturally, at least, we should try to avoid doing that.
Yeah, and also obviously dehumanizing language, vermin and all that stuff. I don't think, you know, there is a way to have very trenchant debates. You and I have trenchant debates quite frequently, but we don't descend into that name-calling stuff or into dehumanizing opponents, and I obviously think that's important.
All right, well, tell us what you think in the comments. I'm sure there are many thoughts. But up next, James Carville has had enough of, quote, pronoun politics. Stick around.
A New York judge dismissed charges of terrorism against Luigi Mangione on Tuesday, but the accused killer of the UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson still faces second-degree murder charges.
Now, most of the ruling focused on whether or not the murder of Thompson should be considered an act of terrorism. The judge's statement reads in part, "The question presented here is whether the defendant's act, no matter how heinous, fits with the definition of terrorism, and the defendant's apparent objective, as stated in his writings, was not to threaten, intimidate, or coerce, but rather to draw attention to what he perceived as the greed of the insurance industry."
The state of New York created its own statute to define terrorism after 9/11. It says terrorism is committing an offensive, quote, with intent to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, influence the policy of a unit of government by intimidation or coercion, or affect the conduct of a unit of government by murder, assassination, or kidnapping.
Dozens of people were gathered outside in support of Mangione during the hearing. Some of them, though not necessarily those pictured here, were seen cheering when word spread that the terrorism charges were being dropped. The 27-year-old has pleaded not guilty in relation to the killing that took place last December. His second-degree murder charge carries a possible 15 years to life sentence. First of all, I find the cheering for him
disgusting, deplorable.
Appalling.
Yeah, people shouldn't be celebrating.
People are so psychotic. I mean, there's nothing new about this. I feel the same way about the people who love Ted Bundy or Marilyn Manson or whoever. Or not Marilyn Manson, Charles Manson.
Yeah.
You can love Marilyn Manson, excuse me.
Yeah.
Charles Manson.
I liked Marilyn.
No, Marilyn Manson's fine. Charles Manson is what I meant by that. Anyway, now, in terms of him getting terrorism charges, the way the judge explained it there actually had me thinking, well, didn't he calling attention to, I don't know, Al-Qaeda is trying to call attention to things, ISIS is trying to call attention to things. What's the difference between calling attention to and trying to intimidate people on a political subject? So I actually didn't agree with that at all. Now, I don't love describing everything as terrorism, and I think terrorism has a very loose definition.
Well, I was reading through it,
and I think it's a left-wing political motivation.
Fine, it's a motivation, but he killed to make a statement, not to instill worldwide or United States-wide fear. And so that would fall under the guise of terrorism. And so courts are not emotional, right? They're supposed to not be emotional. They're supposed to go by the books. What are the laws? What are the rules? And there's a precedent that you start to set if you overcharge people with things that actually don't align with how you define, especially, in New York, where 9/11 kind of opened up the door for how we define terrorism in the modern century.
So it's only terrorism when Muslims do it?
No, I'm just saying that's not the same thing as one person targeting one CEO. I don't think that his intention, according to the courts, was to instill widespread fear throughout the whole country. It was to make a statement, be it political, to say that the healthcare system is wrong. Obviously, he's expressed those views. So, of course, that's worth committing him for murder if he gets charged. I mean, if he's fully accused and guilty of that. But terrorism doesn't align to them right here. And I think, the courts are not going to stretch the terrorism statute in order to make him get more charges. We should just charge people with what they actually have done under what our law says.
I mean, I don't really care whether he gets life in prison or the death penalty. He should certainly get life in prison, at least. I'm not a huge proponent necessarily of the death penalty, but that for me, that's more because we've wrongly executed people, and if you execute someone, you can't, and you later find out the evidence was bad, you can't reverse that decision. I think in cases where the guilt is just overwhelmingly likely because of video evidence or whatnot, like in this case, I think it doesn't violate my moral code to have him executed. I don't really care one way or the other. I think that line between trying to intimidate the public and sending a message to the public by killing someone in a high-profile politically with an ideology and a statement to make, that is a blurry distinction to me. Or I'm just not satisfied that distinction exists at all.
Well, another thing that we can do is set a new guideline for the country, or states can implement this, is what they define terrorism as, and then any politically motivated killing can be terrorism. But just understand that if anybody does probably any attacks or anything, which we want to see them come all the way down, we're just calling this all terrorists. Like, it has to be the same, and has to be a precedent that we can now go off of, because we can't have one person being charged with this over here, one person being charged. Yes, the video says that he's done it, but in our courts, and the way that our courts work, is that you're innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
And so although people should not be out there cheering for him or doing any of the nonsense that they're doing, the fact is that's how our court system works. And so they have to go by the law and by the book, and we would hope that the judicial system is not going based off the emotions and the video that we're all seeing and how riled up the American public is about something that we know to be true, right? There's still a process, even for terrorists. Yeah. There is a process in our legal system in the way that we prosecute them.
Yeah, it shouldn't really matter if it's terrorism. He killed someone in cold blood. It was premeditated, first-degree murder. It was not in self-defense. There is no mitigating factor here. He went out of his way. He made a plan to kill someone and did it. He should go to prison for the rest of his life or be executed, regardless of whether it's considered terrorism, is what I would say.
And my question is, so are you looking at...
And that's true for anyone in a similar situation, regardless of... If he killed the CEO of a bank or the CEO of Old Navy, I don't know why that popped into my head.
That's
any
not a
company...
political statement, probably, because they'll say...
Right, I'm saying whether it's a political statement or not, he should be in prison for the rest of his life or be executed.
But are you suggesting that then the court systems in New York are politically swayed to a way that they're trying to undercharge him? Because there's something that they gain from that? Because
I don't know.
It's like you're being insinuated, but I don't misquote you.
Adoring little Gen Z girls who are just obsessed with him or something.
So you think the courts are swaying to social media pressure by young girls
I don't know what I'm saying.
that think Luigi Mangione is cute?
I don't know if that's motivating their decision. I think I think
that can't be what you can't believe that little of our court system. That's why I really wanted to clarify why you're saying when they're undercharging him, because I don't understand what the motivation would be when most of America, we're not talking about social media online and the fray that gets elevated. We're talking about most people in positions of power. The same way with Charlie Kirk, condemn that.
Was it 15 years to life or 20 years to life? 15 or 20 years in prison does not seem enough time if that's all he gets for this crime.
But overcharging somebody and then they're
I don't think it's possible to overcharge them.
Yeah, but you're not. That's what I'm saying. You don't work in the judicial system in any way. So
okay, you're right.
You're going off your feelings and what you think to overcharge. People have been overcharged before.
It should be based on my yes.
No, I'm
some
saying
people are overcharged.
So if they're looking at this by the book and saying, let's not do an overreach here. Let's make sure this makes sense.
Right.
Why are you saying
3 years?
3
years in solitary confinement for trespassing in the U.S. Capitol is overcharging. 15 years for cold-blooded, premeditated murder would be undercharging.
So if they overcharge him,
it's just my opinion.
But let's say they undercharge him and it's 15 to life, he might get the highest end of that lower sentence.
And I hope he does.
Versus terrorism, and then he gets 5 years because that charge was so extreme or something. Tell me how you want that to be handled. If he gets life, then everyone should be happy.
The minimum is life.
Well, everyone should be happy if he gets life on the same...
I agree. I'm not disagreeing with you. I don't care. Right. I don't care if you call it terrorism or just murder. I don't.
You just want to see him in jail for more than 15 years.
I want to see him in jail for the rest of his life or dead. Because he killed someone. With no mitigating factors. No, it wasn't a fight. It wasn't not even a one-off psychotic episode. He planned it out.
Right.
It was planned out. and it was motivated by some broader cause, that type of thing. They're not mitigating factors.
Well, terrorism is really meant to destabilize public order, and what he did, I think the courts found that they don't find that it destabilized public order in any way. They found that he committed a crime because he had these gripes against the healthcare system.
It hasn't destabilized public order is too nebulous for me. Maybe it's destabilized public order? What do you mean? We're talking about the health. He succeeded in drawing attention to the dysfunction in the healthcare industry, and there are
okay,
tons
but
of
9/11 destabilized public order. You understand you understand? There's no confusion about that. Like the country was destabilized.
Significant thing involving,
which is why it was
deaths.
Very clearly terrorism charges across the board for everyone involved, and that's kind of why I'm thinking.
So you have to be part of a group that's designated a terrorist group, and that's what makes it terrorism.
No, but you can be charged with murder and still get the fullest extent of the law put against you and commit your time. I mean, go to jail. Like, why does that bother you? That's the part that I really want to get to the bottom of. I don't think that everyone's a
all that bothers me
supporter.
is the idea of him getting too lenient a sentence. That's all that bothers me.
And I would hope that our judicial system doesn't have people that are Luigi Mangione sympathizers, right?
Yeah, I hope they're not listening to the fangirls. It's utterly
which would be absurd
behavior. Good news for those of you coming up next who do use TikTok. There are details of an agreement, the aspects of a plan to keep that app still operating in the U.S. We'll tell you more. Stay with us.